As I just said, when I was in Peru, preaching was very different and it was very direct. And I remember I asked Thomas and I said, do they learn from this? Because I said, I remember when I went to Cherbourg, they preached probably the same way. And I'd only been in Cherbourg as pastor for 2 days and there was a funeral. And I thought, I don't want to do a funeral just yet. I want to see how funerals are done here. So I invited the old pastor before me to come and do the funeral. And I'll never forget it. So there's a stage and then the coffin's down there and it's open. And Pastor Tonga stood up and said, "This man's in hell and you could be next." And I thought, whoa. But that was the way the missionaries that work with Aboriginal people did it. But I said to Thomas, they were numb to it. It just meant nothing to them. And I said, so when you preach this direct way, do the Peruvian people learn? And he said, Garth, preaching isn't about learning. And I said, what? He said, it's not learning that's important in our lives. He said, we can learn heaps of stuff. We can gain great understandings about certain things and certain topics, but it may not change anything. He said, it's not the learning that's important. He said, preaching is about doing. He said, true learning comes when we act on what we've learned. And he said, that's the way we preach the way we do. We don't want to make them feel good. We don't want to, just give them knowledge or theology. We want them to change their actions. We want them to go out and live the gospel. Have you ever learned something that required you to act on it and you didn't? He asked me, has that ever happened to me? And I said, actually, yeah. I said, I remember I used to play squash a few years ago and I never really improved in the game. And I asked the guy that ran the squash, he was a coach, and he said, Garth, you've got 2 big problems when it comes to squash. Number one is your racket. I had one of those old little circle rackets, and by this time they'd had big ones. And he said, so your racket's actually a big problem, but so is your fitness. He said, and so what I did is the next day I got up, I went out and bought a new racket. I got out his sheet, he wrote fitness program for me to do of squats and sit-ups and this and that. Never touched it. Never did it at all. And anyway, week after week, I would still lose my squash games and I'd die in the last 5 minutes and I'd ask him what's going on. And he'd say, it's your fitness. But I didn't do anything about it. I hadn't learned anything. And so it's not the learning that's important. And this was Thomason's point. He said it's in acting what you have learnt that is reasonable. And he said that's why we preach the way we do here. If you don't act or put into practice what you've learnt, you've really learnt nothing. And I think this is the reason that I also, when it came for me to choose my New Testament book in college to spend 6 months on, I chose the book of James. I said last time one of the reasons was the comments he made at the end of chapter 1 on religion. But another reason, in his letter, James doesn't pull any punches. He always cuts straight to the heart of the matter with determination. And this is great for us because there's not really much room in really saying, oh, what's he meaning? He is quite direct. He would think he would fit well in Peru. Like preaching in Peru, he tells exactly what they are to do. And again, with this passage that Sarah read out before, he's done the exact same things again. If you remember, before I went to Peru, we finished at the end of chapter 1. And here James was showing his readers, what kind of religion does God like? Well, it's an active religion. One that takes care of people. What kind of people? Orphans and widows. What kind of people are they? They were the poorest of the poor. And so he says, what you need to be doing is you need to be caring for these kind of people. You need to be meeting the needs of these kind of people. That's the religion that God likes. And now as we begin in James chapter 2, he becomes even more direct on this passage. He's challenging his readers about the ways that they may be failing in this area, the way they are not living out love towards the poor. And he gives them 4 attributes that, that they can live out to help them. And so as we study and look at this passage today, even though it may not be directly written to us, let's not just come with an attitude of learning. Let's not just get to the end of this and be thankful for a history lesson. Let's listen to this passage and see what he says to them and ask ourselves, do I need this challenge? Am I doing this in my life? What of these 4 attributes can I say? Because I think when you do that, that's when it comes to fruit. So, he starts off in James, and basically the first thing I think he says is we are to treat everyone fairly. You know, we all have favourite things, whether it's food, drink, movies, music, whatever. And these things aren't a problem. But when you start to show favouritism to people, that's a problem. A problem it seemed that these Christians that James is writing to had. What is James's message to them? Don't show favouritism. Pretty simple, hey? You'll notice that James paints a hypothetical picture here. He uses the word supposed. 2 people come into your meeting. One's dolled up with the best outfits and the best jewellery, while the other one that comes into your meeting, he's a bit of a dag. Now, there is debate to whether is James just using an analogy here, or is he referring to a situation that was actually happening in these meetings that they would know about? Most scholars believe the latter. They believe James is confronting a specific situation that was happening to visitors when they came to the Christian meetings that these Christians were holding. It seems when someone came to their meeting, how that someone looked or how much that someone had determined how they were treated. Wow, how bad is that? How can they do that? Don't they understand the gospel? Now, before we say we never did this, as I said, let's ask ourselves, do we need this challenge? I can't help but think we often make the same mistake. When visitors come into our church, we tend to judge them straight away by an outward appearance. We look at their dress, their colour of their skin, their fashion, or any other superficial things. I remember one night I cut my finger when I was butchering and I wasn't able to drive for a few weeks. And my mum, who doesn't go to church, never goes to church, she dropped me off at Bellevue Heights Baptist Church this Sunday night. And she pulled up into the car park and she saw people going into church wearing singlet, shorts and thongs. And she said to me, "This is disgusting." She was shocked and absolutely horrified at the way and what people were wearing of going into church. I remember when I was a butcher down at Edwardstown, there was a cult, maybe some of you know it, but there was a cult at Edwardstown. And I befriended this girl. She shopped at Coles and she was part of this cult. And this cult taught her that she had to wear certain clothes to be accepted by God. She could only wear long dresses, she could wear sandals and head coverings. I always shopped at Edwardstown, they always come in. But she met a Christian, and it wasn't me, but she met another Christian, and he come in and shared the gospel with her, and he saved her. She left the cult, and I remember she commented to me that she remembered the great feeling of freedom that she had at a time of conversion and beyond. It wasn't a great freedom of forgiveness of sin like most of us would probably have when we experienced our conversion. For her, the great freedom was for the first time in her life, she believed and knew that God accepted her no matter what she wore. And so her belief and her passion, and she used to talk about this all the time, is you can wear as a Christian whatever you want. You can come to church almost naked if you want to, and that's okay. Because for her, that was her heart, that was her goal. On the other flip side, I remember in Pakenham, we had one of the elders there, lovely man, great man. He would always come to church in a suit and a tie, always. And he used to say to me how he believed that all men should wear this kind of thing to church because it is respectful to God. It shows a reverence to God. I remember the first time I did a funeral over there, I got out my funeral suit and I wore a suit and tie. He came up to me and he says, "Why is it you young people, you get dressed up for the dead but get dressed down for Jesus?" Who's right? Who do you identify with more? Well, when I talk to both these people, I tell them the same message. I tell them we don't have a right to tell others how to dress for church. You may feel it's important to get dressed up for church and wear a tie. That's fine. And you may think it doesn't matter what you wear to church because God accepts you just the way you are and with what you're wearing. That's fine too. Here's James's challenge. What's not fine is when we treat others different who don't share our same expectations. Now again, you may think you've never done this, but I think if we all have a good look at our past, I'm quite sure, like my mum, we've all been shocked or horrified or disgusted at something some other Christian has done or worn or been. And it's changed the way we see them, and it's changed the way we treat them. And so here the challenge is for us. Whenever someone comes to visit our church, we need to show spiritual maturity and we need to be fair to everyone. We need to be fair to that person. If someone turns up to our church in a Lamborghini and like Thomas did at that school, he's wearing a three-piece suit bearing gifts, we treat him fairly. If someone turns up in shorts and ripped shirt and thongs, we treat him exactly the same way. We treat him fairly. We need to try and see and treat every person as our Father in heaven sees and treats them. God is not impressed with riches and social status. Even Jesus said in Mark 12, the poor widow who gave a few cents at the temple offering was greater than the Pharisees that gave heaps. Our Father does not look or treat people differently because of their outward appearance, and as Christians of that Father, as children of that Father, neither should we. Not just in church, but I believe everywhere. What does James say we're doing when this kind of thing happens or doesn't happen? What does he say is going on when we judge and treat people on outward appearance or our own understanding of them about what we see? He says, have you not discriminated amongst yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Ouch. Can you identify? Have you done this? Sadly, I've seen this work out in my own life. I've been prone to judge people by what I see. I know at times I'll look at a person that seems to be a great leader or influential person, someone that has people and is great in rooms and everything like that. And I thought, wow, how great would it be if that person became a Christian? I'm going to work hard to really try and reach out to that person. Yet I know when I meet someone that's not excitable, when they're very quiet and they barely say two words, I don't have the same thoughts. I don't actually sit there and think, oh, how great would it be for that person to become a Christian? Other times I know I've judged people by their past and not their future. I remember in Queensland, we had this program where we were to write out 3 people that we would really like to see become Christians as pastors. And my leader said, write them out and give them to me because I'm going to be praying for those people. And I remember one of the comments, oh, don't worry about number 2, praying for number 2. He will never become a Christian. I always remember my leader's response to me about don't bother praying. He said, what if the school teacher, Garth, that led you to Christ had the same thought? Me, on the other hand, in both these situations, I'm looking at people from the wrong eyes. I'm looking at people and I'm doing exactly what James says you will do. When you do that, you discriminate yourself and you have evil thoughts. And you will change the way you treat people. When we start to live like this, we show how spiritual immature we are. We are showing we really are not like Jesus. How do we change this? How do we practice fairness in our human relationships? It's really quite simple. Try and see people as our Heavenly Father sees them. Try and see people the way Jesus saw people. The time Jesus spent with hanging out with sinners and the unworthy was not a compromise. It was a sign of compassion. It was compassion and fairness that caused Jesus to have an attitude that welcomed the unworthy, that welcomed them in regardless of who they were or what they wore. When we have that kind of compassion for people, whether those people are someone in our church or outside of the church, when we have that kind of compassion for people, we meet them and show Jesus as the way he met them. Then and only then can we live and be fair to everyone, regardless of what we see on the outside. Do you know, I can't help but think that this topic that James is writing about, of not having favourites, living out God's fairness, and showing people, that you're all accepted, would have been something close to his heart. Why? Remember, James is the brother of Jesus. He would have witnessed firsthand how his brother was treated. The friends of sinners and the unworthy people of his day, he hung with them. He was with them. Sure, he didn't disapprove of their sin, but he was still with them, and it seemed they were with him. But because of that, he would also witness firsthand how his brother Jesus was despised and rejected by those who should have loved him. Even though he was the very glory of God, the religious experts in Jesus' day judged him by their human standards, by what they saw. They rejected him because of what he didn't have. He came from the wrong city, Nazareth of Galilee. He was not a graduate of their accepted schools. He did not offer official approval of the people in power. He had no wealth, and his followers were a dull mob, and they included a bunch of sinners. And so James would have seen firsthand what it would have been like for people in power to have favourites, for people who have this authority to treat people wrongly, to treat people based on what they wore, what they had, where they come from, who they hung out with. And now it seems these Christians James is writing to is doing the same thing. They're not living out fairness. They're not being fair to everyone. They weren't doing a good job at accepting people the way James's brother did. Jesus showed no favoritism, and neither should Christians. It is Christ who is the link between us and others, and that link is fairness. And so he says, don't show favoritism. Be fair to everyone. Look at everyone through the eyes of Christ. And now in verses 5 to 7, I think he says this: treat everyone gracefully. Talk about an upside down world. Here in verses 5 to 7, James points out the big mistake they're having in favouring the rich. First he says, has not God chosen those who are poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith, to inherit the kingdom he had promised to those who love him? What's James telling them? Guys, you were poor. God's sovereign plan was to choose those who are poor in the eyes of the world. His salvation came to those who could not earn it, did not deserve it, had nothing to offer. James is teaching God saves us completely on the basis of Jesus Christ's work on the cross. He doesn't save us because anything that we are, anything that we have, or anything we come from. If you're saved, you were poor, because that's who God chooses. But he also teaches that work makes the poor man rich. Because of Christ on the cross, the poor inherit all the riches of Christ, he says. This is what we call the grace of God, and this is James's point. If we really believe in the doctrine of God's grace, then that should force us to relate to people differently. We no longer relate to people on the basis of human merit and social status. We relate to them from the point of the grace of God. In his birth, life, and death, Jesus broke down the walls between rich and poor, young and old, educated and uneducated. And it is wrong for Christians to rebuild those walls. If we believe in the grace of God, then we must treat everyone with the same grace. They weren't doing that. He says, you've dishonoured the poor. I'm not sure if you've ever done any counsellor training, but one question we're taught to ask in helping people understand something, ask them the question this: have you ever asked yourself? Say to them, have you ever asked yourself, what would it be like if I didn't drink today? Have I ever asked myself, why do I get upset when my wife tells me what to do, but I don't get upset when other people tell me what to do? Have you ever asked yourself, why do I need to lie all the time? Well, here James puts 4 questions to them. To me, this is a bit like this counselling technique. Guys, why are you favouring the rich? Have you ever asked yourself, has God not chosen you, the poor? Is it not the rich who are exploiting you? Are they not the ones who are dragging you into court? Are they not the ones who are slandering the noble name of him you belong to? I know it's a horrible thing to say, but for me, James is saying, why favour the rich because God chooses the poor? Why favour the rich when they're the ones exploiting you, suing you, slandering you? Focus on the poor. The emphasis here isn't on putting the rich down. James is rather stating some truths about the poor that they were neglecting. Remember, this is still a follow-on from his statement about living a religion that God pleases God. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and fruitless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. That's the poor and needy. James is pointing out to his readers the fact that if you're favouring the rich, how can you see the needs of the poor? How can you live that life if you are favouring the rich? If all your time and energy is spent looking after the rich, helping them, then you're being polluted by the world. See the connection? Guys, know you're poor. You know you've been made rich in the grace of God, and so treat everyone with that grace. Next, he says in verses 8 to 11, treat everyone lovingly. James reaches back into the Old Testament and he gets a verse from Leviticus. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against your people, but love your neighbour as yourself. I'm the Lord your God. You'll notice in James 2:8, he calls this the royal law. Why is love your neighbour called the royal law throughout Scripture? Well, for one thing, it was given by the king. God the Father gave it to the law, and God the Son reaffirmed it. But love your neighbour is the royal law for a second reason. That law rules all other laws. Paul says love is the fulfilling of the law. Think about it. There would be no need for thousands of complex laws if people truly loved their neighbour as God did. Treating each other lovingly does not mean that I have to like a person, does mean that I have to agree with a person. I may not like his language, I may not like his habits, I may not want him as a best friend. So what does it mean? Living out the love of God means treating others the way God's treated me. It is an act of the will, not an emotion. This means it is by the power of the Spirit. As I act in love towards others, I find myself drawn more and more to them. I may see them through Christ, and this is what it means. And so James says, if you are doing that, guess what? You are right. But if you're not doing that, you are a lawbreaker. You may not murder, you may not commit adultery, but if you're showing favouritism, you're breaking the law. You failed. And so he says, treat everyone fairly, graciously and lovely. And now finally in verse 12, treat everyone mercifully. What difference does it make to live out mercy? What kind of difference does he say it is when we live out mercy the way God's mercy is? I love his words. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Hence why I chose that fruit. Judgment makes a person a slave, but mercy sets that person free. Judgment limits a person's potential, but mercy enables them to enjoy life. Judgment condemns a person to pay, but mercy points them to the word of God and freedom. Judgment makes us become selfish, but mercy frees and enables us to treat people as God commanded us to do so. Jesus showed mercy to people, and it broke their chains and it changed their life. He showed mercy to Peter. That freed him to become the rock of the church that would be built on. He showed mercy to Matthew, the tax collector. That freed him to become a faithful disciple who would one day write one of the 4 Gospels. He showed mercy to the sinful woman at the world, and that freed her up to be an instrument of reaping a great harvest. And the list could go on and on and on from our Bible. But do you know who else you can add to that list? You. Add yourself to that list. Imagine if God didn't show you mercy. Where would you be today if God treated you on what you wore or what you had when you first came to him? You're doomed, because what you wore was sin and what you had to bring to the table was nothing. He would have been completely ripe to say, get out of my presence. I'm going to wipe you out. I'm going to give you no special seat, no special place. But he didn't. He showed you mercy. You fell at his feet and he received you with mercy. This is what James says we are to live out. And so we are to be fair, graceful, loving and mercy. That's it. Easy. Right? Wrong. I'm not sure if you took my advice as you were listening today. As I said, it's to ask yourself the question, do I need to be challenged in any of these areas? Living out God's fairness, grace, love and mercy? If you do, then chances are when he brings that conviction to you, you come to the same conclusion that I come to. That's hard. Living this way is hard. Loving others, not judging them, not showing favourites is not a formula we easily live by. You know, I wish God had said, look, show fairness, love, grace and mercy to the people you click with. You know, the group of people that you like, you get along with your friends. Show fairness, love, grace and mercy to that group of people on your inside. Don't worry about those on the outside. Those on your inside circle, if you show those things to those, they're going to appreciate those godly qualities more than those on the outside. So don't worry about showing them on the outside. Just show them to your close friends. How much easier would that be? How much better and easier for us if he had said that? But he doesn't. The Bible and James shows us that these attributes of God are to be given to everyone around us. Everyone in our life. Those you like, those you don't like. Those you get along with, those that you cringe every time you come into their presence. You are his worker in his vineyard. He's put you where you are. And all those people around you, he's put them there too. I'm sure you've heard it said before, you may be the only chance these people ever get to see a loving, graceful Jesus. So live it out. Don't have favourites. Can I put one more final challenge to you? As you leave today, ask God to reveal to you. Am I judging anyone at the moment? Am I treating anyone unfairly at the moment? Am I not showing fairness, grace, love and mercy to someone? Honestly, ask God to reveal that. Ask God to go and point that out to you. Ask him, is there anyone I need to go to or see because I know I haven't been looking at them through the eyes of Jesus? If he does, if he brings someone to mind, don't be like me and my exercise for squash. Don't just learn the information. As Thomas says, you learn nothing unless you act on it. What happens when you act on it? James says when you live that out, you are doing right. You are following a religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless. May God bless you.